These films weren't small mistakes. They were massive bets that collapsed in front of everyone. How does a sci-fi epic with scale, ambition, and vision still fail so badly it gets forgotten? Because in the 1970s, something strange kept happening. The bigger the idea, the harder it fell. This isn't just a list of flops. It's what went wrong when imagination went too far. And one of these films didn't just fail, it quietly changed sci-fi forever. 10. Zardoz, 1974. It doesn't look real. And that's exactly where it loses you. Before the story even begins, the image is already overwhelming. A giant floating stone head speaking to followers, and Sean Connery dressed in a costume that instantly breaks immersion. Instead of curiosity, the audience feels distance. But beneath that strange surface, Zardoz was aiming for something deeper. Directed by John Boorman, it explored immortality, control, and the decay of human purpose in a divided society. The problem wasn't the ideas, it was how they were delivered. The film jumps between symbolism and narrative without grounding the viewer. Scenes feel more like concepts than experiences, and when audiences can't emotionally connect, even the most ambitious themes begin to feel hollow. At the box office, that disconnect was immediate. Viewers didn't just reject the film, they avoided it. Word of mouth focused less on meaning and more on how strange everything looked. Over time, it found a cult audience, but in 1974, it wasn't seen as bold. It was seen as unapproachable. And once that perception forms, recovery becomes almost impossible. Tia 9. The Final Program, 1973. It starts with intelligence and ends in confusion. The film introduces a genius-level protagonist, Moog, living in a futuristic world shaped by science and excess. Expectations build quickly. You anticipate a sharp, controlled narrative driven by intellect and discovery. But that structure never arrives. Instead, the story begins to fragment. Identity shifts, reality bends. The film moves away from logic and into abstraction, reflecting the experimental style of Michael Moorcock's work. But what works on the page doesn't always translate visually. For audiences in 1973, this felt disorienting rather than intriguing. The tone keeps changing, the pacing never stabilizes, and without a clear emotional anchor, viewers struggle to stay engaged. Scenes feel disconnected, and as if they belong to different films entirely. At the box office, the result was predictable: low turnout, minimal impact. Because when a film demands too much interpretation without offering direction, viewers don't lean in. They step away. Today, it's remembered as an experiment. But at the time, it wasn't analyzed. It was abandoned. 8. Phase 4, 1974. The danger is everywhere, but nothing is happening. That's the feeling Phase 4 creates. And for many viewers, it became frustrating instead of suspenseful. Directed by Saul Bass, the film presents a chilling concept: ants evolving into a collective intelligence that begins to outthink humanity. It's quiet, methodical, almost clinical. There are no loud invasions, no dramatic battles, just patterns forming, slowly. The problem is expectation. See, audiences entered expecting a sci-fi thriller. What they experienced instead was observation, long sequences of behavior, minimal dialogue, and a pace that resists urgency. That restraint, while artistically bold, created emotional distance. At the box office, the response was cold. Viewers found it difficult to stay engaged with a story that refused to escalate in familiar ways. And then there's the ending: abstract, surreal, and unresolved. Instead of closure, it leaves interpretation. For many, that wasn't satisfying. It was alienating. Only later did audiences begin to appreciate its uniqueness. But in 1974, it wasn't ahead of its time. It was simply out of sync with what people wanted. 7. A Boy and His Dog, 1975. It feels wrong, and it never tries to fix that. From the opening moments, A boy and his dog establishes a world where morality has collapsed. Survival comes first. Everything else follows, if it follows at all. Starring Don Johnson, the film pairs a young man with a telepathic dog in a brutal post-apocalyptic landscape. Their relationship is unusual, sometimes darkly humorous, but always unsettling. And that's the issue. The tone never stabilizes. It shifts between satire, violence, and bleak realism without warning. For audiences expecting a clear narrative direction, this unpredictability creates discomfort. Not tension, discomfort. The world itself offers no relief. There are no traditional heroes, no emotional grounding. Just a series of encounters that reinforce how broken everything has become. At the box office, this tone proved difficult to accept. Viewers weren't prepared for a sci-fi story that refused to offer hope or clarity. The film didn't fail because it lacked originality. It failed because it rejected comfort. And in 1975, that was a risk most audiences weren't willing to take. 6. The Black Hole, 1979. It looks like something familiar, but feels completely off. Released after Star Wars reshaped audience expectations, The Black Hole appears, at first glance, to follow the same path: space travel, advanced technology, and a mysterious mission. But the tone tells a different story. Darker, slower, more philosophical. And that created confusion. Disney attempted to move into more mature territory, blending family-friendly elements with unsettling themes and imagery. The result sits in between. Not accessible enough for younger viewers, and not dynamic enough for sci-fi fans expecting action. Visually, the film is impressive. The Cygnus spaceship feels vast and detailed. The robotic antagonist is striking, but visuals alone couldn't carry engagement. The pacing slows momentum, the narrative leans into abstraction, and the emotional connection never fully forms. At the box office, expectations were high. The returns didn't match, because audiences didn't reject science fiction. They rejected uncertainty, and The Black Hole never clearly decided what it wanted to be. That hesitation became its defining flaw. 5. Logan's Run, 1976. Everything looks perfect, until you realize no one is allowed to grow old. That's the hook Logan's Run builds instantly, a controlled society where life ends at 30, enforced through ritual disguised as renewal. It's a concept that creates immediate tension and immediate curiosity, but sustaining that tension proved harder. The film constructs a visually striking world, domed cities, polished environments, and a system built on illusion. Yet once the story moves beyond that initial idea, the pacing begins to shift unevenly. Moments of urgency are followed by stretches that feel less focused. The emotional core never fully locks in. Viewers understand the concept, but they don't always feel connected to the characters navigating it, and that matters, because without that connection, the stakes remain intellectual instead of personal. At the box office, the film performed moderately, but not enough to match expectations tied to its scale and concept. It wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't a success either. And that middle ground can be damaging, because it suggests something more difficult than failure: potential that never fully translates. 4. Damnation Alley, 1977. It didn't fail slowly, it failed instantly, because it arrived at the worst possible moment. Damnation Alley had scale: post-nuclear America, violent storms, mutated threats, and a massive armored vehicle designed to cross a destroyed landscape. On paper, it had everything needed to succeed, but timing changed everything. It was released alongside Star Wars, and that comparison was unavoidable. Audiences had just experienced a new level of spectacle: fast-paced, immersive, and emotionally engaging. In contrast, Damnation Alley felt slower, less refined, and visually limited. Even its biggest asset, the Landmaster vehicle, couldn't compete with the sense of scale audiences had just seen elsewhere. Aren't the result? Immediate box office collapse, not because the film lacked effort, but because it couldn't match the moment. And in cinema, timing isn't just important, it's everything. Standing next to something revolutionary doesn't give you attention. It takes it away. 3. Silent Running, 1972. There's no war, no enemy, just one man making a choice. And that silence is exactly what made audiences disconnect. Silent Running, starring Bruce Dern, tells a deeply personal story set in space, focused on preserving the last remaining plant life from a destroyed Earth. It's not about action, it's about responsibility, loss, isolation. The film moves slowly, deliberately, allowing emotions to build without distraction. But for audiences expecting traditional science fiction, that restraint felt empty rather than meaningful. There are no major set pieces, no escalating conflict in the conventional sense, just internal tension. And that kind of storytelling requires patience. At the box office, patience was limited. The film underperformed, unable to connect with viewers looking for spectacle rather than introspection. But over time, its message became more relevant. Environmental themes, once subtle, now feel urgent, which creates a strange outcome. The film didn't change. The audience did. 2. THX 1138, 1971. Everything is controlled, and that control becomes suffocating. From the first frame, THX 1138 removes anything familiar. No warmth, no color, no emotional release. Directed by George Lucas, it presents a future where identity is erased and obedience is enforced through constant surveillance. It's cold by design. And that design is relentless. The film avoids traditional storytelling structures. Dialogue is minimal. Characters feel distant. The world is intentionally sterile. That artistic choice creates a clear vision, but it also creates separation. Audiences struggle to connect with a world that offers no entry point, no emotion to hold on to, no character to follow closely. At the box office, that distance translated into failure. Viewers didn't engage. They observed and then left. But this film represents something important. It shows the early form of a filmmaker who would later redefine the genre, because sometimes a failure isn't the end of a vision. It's the beginning of it. 1. Solaris, 1972. It doesn't try to entertain you. It tries to confront you. And that's where most audiences turned away. Directed by Andrei Tarkovsky, Solaris isn't structured like a typical science fiction film. There's no urgency, no clear objective driving the narrative forward. Instead, it focuses on memory. Guilt. The psychological weight of being human. The pacing is slow, intentionally so. Scenes linger. Silence is used as a tool, not a gap. The planet itself becomes less of a setting and more of a reflection of the characters' inner states. For mainstream audiences, this approach was difficult. There's no easy interpretation, no quick payoff, and no relief from the emotional pressure it builds. At the box office, it struggled to reach wide appeal, especially outside its original context. But over time, something changed. The same qualities that pushed audiences away began to draw them back. Because Solaris wasn't designed for immediate impact. It was designed to stay with you. And that kind of film doesn't fade. It waits. They weren't just failures. They were warnings. What happens when ambition moves faster than audiences can follow? These films didn't disappear because they were bad. They disappeared because they were out of sync with their time. But here's what makes it unsettling. Many of their ideas came back later and worked. So the real question is, how many failures today are just waiting for the future to catch up?